Richie here with video 3 of 14 in a fortnight, the 14 concepts we're going to go through in the 2 weeks running up to the May, or the opening of the May CFA Level 1 window. Today, probably going to be useful. We're looking at Bayes' theory. Already regret that probably pun, sorry about that. But we're looking at Bayes' theory. And we're going to walk it through. As always with these concepts, the best thing to do is to walk it through. So here's an example that we're going to hit. And we're going to hit it via a tree. We always... And that's the reason I picked Bayes for one of these videos. We always, in office hour sessions, guaranteed to get a question about Bayes. People seem to hate it. I think the reason they hate it is this. P-I-E-I, P-I, E-I, P-E, P-I. It's horrible. You end up spending so much time in a question trying to decide what's an event, what's an information, where's the pi, where's the PEI. It's an absolute disaster. My clever advice, embrace the tree. The tree is actually just good, honest fun. People say, oh, it takes ages to draw the tree. It doesn't. It's going to take a while here because I'm actively trying to explain it and talk it out loud. You're encouraged not to do that in the exam. In fact, don't. So we're going to be tree-based. Let's tree this one. Analyst working for a PE firm has developed a test to determine whether startups receiving private equity funding will eventually make it to an IPO. Her data reveals even the following probabilities. Here we go. Probability that this startup has no IPO, 0.8. Look at that. An unconditional probability stands on its own. Whenever you see an unconditional probability that just stands on its own, that makes me think that could be the root of the tree. That could be where I start. But, plot twist, we've got another one here. Probability that we pass the test is 0.26. So again, that stands on its own. So where am I starting the tree? Where's the root of the tree? Do I start with the IPO? Do I start with passing the test? Well, a clue comes from the third one. The probability of passing the test given. The straight line here means given. That means this is a conditional probability. This is the probability of passing the test given that we know there was an IPO. So this has already happened. What's the probability of this then happening? If this has already happened, if it is the second term in a conditional probability, that is going to be the root of my tree. Because I can start with that. And obviously, if I know no IPO, I know the probability of an IPO. I'm going to start with that as the root. Then I can use these conditional probabilities as the branches. So here we go. I'm going to start with no IPO. That's given as 0.8. IPO will be up there. Then the branches will be pass or fail. So we'll have pass or fail. We'll have pass or fail. We have 2 events, so we're going to have 4 outcomes. But it's important to understand we're going to have to fill in here 2 types of probabilities. The first column we're going to fill in is a set of conditional probabilities. These 4 here will be conditional probabilities. The probability of passing given an IPO, failing given an IPO, and so on. Then we're going to calculate joint probabilities, which show us our outcomes. This is and. This is 2 things happening. This is conditional on something happening. It's really the probability of one thing given another. This is the probability of 2 things. Passing and IPOing, failing and IPOing. This column shows all 4 possible outcomes. It must sum to 1. Has to. So let's fill in the tree. What do we have? First one, no IPO is 0.8. We've put that in 0.8 there. Second one is probability of passing the test. Well, I can't put that into my tree because these are all conditionals. So it's none of those. These are joints. These are 2 things. It's none of those. But look, we have 4 outcomes here. This one, this joint one is IPO and pass. This joint one is IPO and fail. This one is no IPO, no IPO and pass. And this is no IPO and fail. These are our 4 outcomes that add up to 1. Only 2 of these outcomes involve passing. So if I add together these 2 in total, because they're the only outcomes where we have a pass. Those two together must be 0.26. So I've used my 0.8, I've used my 0.26. Probability of passing the test given an IPO, that is my conditional probability of 0.7. So passing the test given an IPO. Given an IPO means we have to be in this top branch, given an IPO. We passed the test, so it must be the pass given the IPO. That's this conditional of 0.7. I think I've used all the information I have. So now the fun part. What can I start filling in? Let's go back to the root. No IPO is 0.8. Well, there's only one other option. IPO must be 0.2. What I've done there is use the law of total probability for mutually exclusive and exhaustive events. Or, in simple language, the fact that the probability of every possible outcome has to add up to 1. That has to be 0.2. Now we're starting to cook. I know the probability of an IPO is 0.2, and I know the conditional probability of passing given an IPO is 0.7, so I must know the joint. That has to be 0.7 times 0.2. 0.7 times 0.2 is 0.14. So I know an IPO and passing is 0.14. Where to now? Well, this is 0.14. This is one of the passes. We know the two outcomes that involve passing add up to 0.26. So if this is 0.14, what's this? It's going to have to be 0.26 minus 0.14. These are the only two passes. One of them is 0.14. This has to be 0.26 minus 0.14. 0.12. Where to now? Well, now I have a joint probability here of 0.12. I know the probability of no IPO. I can fill in this conditional probability here. I know 0.8 multiplied by whatever this is. So 0.8 multiplied by what I'm missing gives me that 0.12. If I take my 0.12 and divide it by 0.8, it's got to be 0.15. Pence, 0.15. Right, I think we're nearly done. What do we have here? 0.7 for a pass. Well, this is the only other option once you know you've IPO'd. This has to be 0.3. This is 0.15. The only other option there, that's pass. This must be fail. That's got to add to 1. That's got to be 0.85. I can fill in my joint probabilities. 0.8 times 0.85. 0.8 times 0.85 gives me the joint of 0.68. 0.2 times 0.3. 0.2 times 0.3. That's going to give me a joint here of 0.06. And the whole thing is filled in. Just to make it a bit neater, I'll just remove those calculations. We've got everything we need. Now, in the exam, you obviously don't want to do this, but whilst you're learning this, you can audit very quickly. Obviously, the 4 joint probabilities should, as we've said, sum to 1. If you add those 4 together, they come to 1. If they don't, you've gone wrong somewhere. You can check where you went wrong. If you take these two, 0.14 and 0.06, they add up to 0.2 because they're the only outcomes where we had an IPO. Makes sense. If you take these two together, 0.12 and 0.68, they add up to 0.8. The only two outcomes from no IPO. Makes sense. So I'm pretty confident in what I've got. And we've explained the whole tree. We can answer any question we could possibly be asked. The only downside here, we haven't been asked any questions. But let's pose one. Let's ask, what is the probability that a startup gets to IPO given a pass in this analyst's test? A conditional probability. Always start with what we know has happened. We know after the straight line there, the vertical line, that there was a pass. So given we passed means we must be in one of these two outcomes. We must be in one of the outcomes that had a pass. So in your denominator, put in the probability of ending up in one of those two. We actually already know what that is. It was given here. It's 0.26. So the universe of outcomes where there was a pass is 26% of the time, 0.26. We want the probability that given we were in those outcomes, there was an IPO. Well, there are only 2 boxes we can pick. Which one of them had an IPO? Only this one. Only this one. So it's 0.14 out of the total of 0.26. A probability of 53.85%. The classic Bayes question. But why we asked that? Is it just a fun little puzzle? Well, no, it's all about updated probabilities. This is the point of Bayes. This is the true genius. We already knew the probability that a firm makes an IPO or gets to an IPO was 0.2. So we can write that as the probability that a startup makes it to IPO, 0.2, 20%. A 20% chance that one of these startups gets to IPO. This analyst has designed a test to try and help identify those that have a better chance of getting to IPO. Has she succeeded? Well, look at this. The probability of getting to IPO, given they passed this analyst test, is 53.85%. It was only 20. Now it's 53.85. This test appears to have some use. Let's try one more. Let's see if we can calculate the updated probability of not making an IPO if we have a fail in the test. So here we go. Given a fail means we're in the universe of outcomes that were fails. Where are the universe of outcomes that are fails? Well, it's this one and this one. They're the only 2. So add together these 2, 0.06 and 0.68, probability of 0.74, which makes sense because the universe of passes was 0.26. They had to 1. So the denominator is 0.74. Numerator, no IPO. Given we're in that 0.74 of outcomes, which was no IPO. No IPO was here. 0.68. 0.68 over 0.74, 91.89%. Our updated probability of not making it to IPO, given a fail in the test, 91.89%. Our original probability of no IPO, 0.8. So once again, the test does have some value. Bayes' theorem, everyone, an absolute belter. Final interesting fact, I used to teach courses, live courses, opposite the cemetery where Bayes was buried. That, probably not going to come up in the exam, but everything else here, hopefully pretty helpful.